Welcome to the Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac, where our talk runs the gamut. Today, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is refusing to cooperate frustrated with the filibuster and restrictive voting laws. 4 police officers are suing the Baltimore Police Department, and a talk show host had a lot to say about a Black female icon being on the United States Quarter. The Business of Being Black today are the political and trending highlights of the week. But first, I cannot move on without honoring our deuce. Oh, not deuce like deuces by y'all. FOXSOUL is celebrating 2 years of digital and network content dedicated to our voice, our truth. Take a look.
We're taking time to show the light on what's important for Black lives. We're spreading love, here we go. FOXSOUL.
Our voice, our truth. I've been on this journey with FOXSOUL from day one. Yes, you can call me day one. I could not be more proud of the content that the Business of Being Black has contributed to that goal. Kudos to the team for caring about our community's growth. Kudos to the team for featuring experienced guests who enhance our community's knowledge. Kudos to the team for embracing our community's needs and highlighting them on an international platform. Kudos to the team for honoring every Black perspective and respecting that not all Black people are the same Black people. Not only do we not all look alike, we think differently too. These are just some of the reasons I am proud to host the Business of Being Black and showing the best of our culture, our community, and never less. Alicia Birch, Joyce Coleman Sampson, Avi Bernard, our leaders, James DuBose and Stephen Brown, have kept the promise of being committed to the greater needs of the Black community on this show, The Business of Being Black. And I am more than honored to have been here 2 years to represent that commitment from the heart. So here's to 2 years of our voice, our truth. Here's to 2 years of Tammi Mac. And here's to 2 years of FOXSOUL. And it feels good. Now, let's get down to business, y'all. Please welcome my Friday co-host, the co-founder of the Anti-Racism Kentucky Coalition, Dr. O.J. Oleka is here. Hi, Dr. O.J.
Hey, Tammi Mac, good to be here.
Activist and radio personality, Dominique DePrima is on board. Hi, Dominique.
Hi, Tammi Mac.
And political analyst Ed Sanders is here to rein us all in. Hey, Ed.
Thank you, Tammi Mac. Happy Friday. Congratulations on 2 years. Let's keep it going.
Yes, 2 years is definitely something to congratulate. I accept it. So let's kick it in, y'all. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy will not cooperate with the House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection. He stated, as a representative and the leader of the minority party, it is with neither regret nor satisfaction that I have concluded to not participate with this select committee's abuse of power that stains this institution today and will harm it going forward. So, does the committee have the constitutional right to subpoena McCarthy? If yes, could this lead him to cooperating? Although it sounds like, in the words of Randy Jackson on American Idol, it's a no for me, dog. So, Dr. O.J. Oleka, how do we feel about this?
Well, with regard to whether or not the committee has a constitutional ability, that's actually being debated among scholars about what these types of committees are able to do with their members. But I mean, look, I've said this before on your show, Tammi Mac, and I'll say it again. I think that the committee had a grave error when they didn't expand this to include different types of political issues and concerns with regard to violence. I mean, we saw congressional baseball games get attacked at gunpoint. There were Representative Steve Scalise almost lost his life because an individual was trying to kill members of Congress. I mean, this is something that is rampant within our country. And I think if they truly wanted to get a bipartisan aspect of this, they would have looked at January 6th, they would have looked at a number of events, but they chose not to do that. So unfortunately, this has become more partisan than it needed to. And so I can certainly understand that Leader McCarthy would take this position.
But Dr. OJ, as a Republican, do you believe that the January 6th committee is plausible? Should this investigation go forward?
Well, I think there are a number of things that Congress ought to be doing. I would not put this at the top of the list, to be completely honest with you. This is not something that the American people are thinking about every day. I do, though, think that we have to understand how this was committed, who was involved with it. I'm happy to see that there are people going to prison as a result of this thing. I mean, look, people lost their lives on January 6th. A lot of people, quite frankly, were led astray about what this event was supposed to do. I think it is important that people go to prison for any actions that were committed on this particular day. But again, in terms of the issues facing the American people presently, inflation issues, having not enough food on shelves for people to go get food to eat, I think those are more important and more pressing issues that could certainly be focused on by Congress.
That's funny. I love when people bring in the other important pressing issues. But people having food on the table is definitely a pressing issue, but we can walk and chew gum at the same time, though, can't we, Dominique?
Oh, we definitely can walk and chew gum at the same time. And, this idea that this one committee should study every crime that's ever happened against a lawmaker, or trying to mix apples and oranges, saying that peaceful protests are the same as treason and insurrection, is just completely ridiculous. It's the soft shoe and the prevarication that is the real problem, in my opinion, with what's going on in Congress in America. It's not so much about partisanship, it's just lying. That's a problem, because you can't have an honest debate if two people won't even agree what's an apple and what's an orange. Clearly, they are finding information that we did not know about before. Text messages, these fake certificates that were sent out to try to overturn the Electoral College votes, all of these things that have come out in the course of this investigation, to me, make it clear that this is not only necessary, but urgent. And yes, I agree, inflation is a problem. We have lots of problems, but our democracy has to be at the top of the list. Maintaining our republic has to be at the top of the list.
Does it have to be at the top of the list, Ed?
I think Dominique is right on. I mean, at a certain point, you have to ask yourself, what does being an American mean? Why do I allow the Congress to hold, any sway over my life? And it's because we respect the tenets of this country and the foundation, and it's all rooted in the Constitution. And so when you look at January 6th, it's a very specific event, but it has some very far-reaching impacts. This is not a question about, terrorism against, Steve Scalise or even any harm against any other particular lawmaker. This very particular event was really designed to subvert the election. And as Dominique was alluding to, it happened on several different levels. It wasn't just the January 6th event. We're now learning about how in a variety of different states there were fraudulent and forged documents sent in to try to substitute out electors in the Electoral College. This is a serious issue. Now, if I'm McCarthy, I understand why he doesn't want to speak on the issue, right? He's the leader of the Republican Party in Congress. And in the end game, what I think the January 6th report is going to detail is how complicit the Republican Party was in this. This wasn't some outlier event where you had entities, and certainly you do have entities like the Proud Boys and others that were present in the melee. But what you're going to find is how complicit Republican leaders were in this. And that is the travesty here. And so for Republican leader McCarthy to kind of say that, there's an overreach or anything like that is mistaken. In the end game, the record will show that he didn't speak, and there's very good reason why, because he'll probably be indicted.
What's interesting most to me about this all is that I'm beginning to find out as an American that lawmakers don't have to follow the law. If I'm subpoenaed, I've got to go. I've got to go, Dr. Oleka.
Well, sure, you have to go. And again, I think the question is out there with regard to what this particular committee has the authority and responsibility to do. And I think that will certainly be resolved by courts. There'll be a lot of lawyers who get into this thing. But again, I think it's really important that we think about the context of what we're talking about. We're talking about a specific event, who was involved in the interactions, and what crimes were committed. Again, I think all these things are very important. I do think it is also important that when you have somebody who shoots up the third member in line to be Speaker of the House, as was done with Steve Scalise, you have to get to the bottom of that. No one's done anything about that with regard to where that individual's particular belief came from. Again, he was a Bernie supporter. So if we're going to indict people in political parties, I think it's important to do the same thing on both sides. Also, when people are at home and they're thinking about what matters to them, we talked about inflation already. We talked about food on the shelves. Gas prices are going up. People are trying to live their lives every day in a way that allows them to afford a regular life. They're not sitting around thinking about who was committing what on January 6th. Again, I think it's important to get to the bottom of all these issues. But Congress, I don't know that it can walk and chew gum at the same time. It has a pretty bad track record of doing a lot of important things over time. I think they can focus on other things.
Duly noted. I though, as a voting American citizen, I am very concerned about our democracy, and I don't want to see an episode like January 6th happen again. And I want every single person who is responsible for it held accountable in some way. And it does offend me that lawmakers don't have to follow the laws. It offends me as an American citizen. I think it's unfair, and I think it's a horrible disrespect to the American people. And that's really all I have to say about that. I don't know if it should be the first thing on the docket or the second thing or the last thing on the docket, but I agree with you, Dr. Oleka. We should also find out who shot your guy. We should find that out too. We should also find out who shot Tupac and who shot Biggie. But look, what are we gonna do? I'll tell you what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a break. Come right back on The Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac. Today, the Business of Being Black are the political and trending highlights of the week. I have my guest here, Dominique DePrima, Dr. O.J. Oleka, and Ed Sanders, all experts in politics. On Tuesday, President Joe Biden expressed his frustration with Republicans who blocked the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. And he called on the U.S. Senate to change its filibuster rules to accommodate the passage of these bills. Now, Democrats don't have the votes to pass either bill without changing the filibuster vote, which requires 60 votes to end debate on legislation. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer set a deadline of January 17th, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, for the Senate to vote on a rules change if Republicans continue to block voting rights legislation. What does this look like? What's going to happen, Dominique?
Well, sadly, I don't think Biden has the votes, and apparently he doesn't have the clout to ensure fair and equal access to our voting rights in this republic. And that's really sad. We have to put it in context. Biden has been focusing on Manchin and Sinema, who are the obvious blockers of these bills. But also, we need to look at the 50 Republicans in the Senate. When the Voting Rights Act was passed, all of the senators were on board. Now we can't even get one Republican. Joe Biden has been in government since the Stone Age. So why does he not have enough clout with we just need 2 Republicans. Surely, I think it's time for the president to get a little gangster. I know he's got some dirt on some of these Republicans, as long as he's known them, or they owe him favors or something. I think it's time to show up and turn up for our voting rights. It's not just Black people that need voting rights, it's Americans. But Black people were promised protections, and I think we are ready to hold him to account.
I'm so happy you said that, Dominique. You took all my feelings away. Like I feel everything you're saying. I do think it's time for Joe Biden to get gangster with it. Ed?
Yeah, and look, you're right. I mean, when we talk about voting rights in America, this kind of dovetails off the January 6th conversation, right? What we're looking at is a group of people, particularly Republicans, that are blocking access to the polls. And voting rights was a hallmark of the civil rights movement. But for this country, it's long been just this question. Is this a country that's going to accept non-white people as Americans, whether it's Native Americans, African Americans, and now we're looking at Latino and Asian Americans? The voting rights is really where you answer that question. And what you're seeing a Republican Party largely made up of white people that are saying, no, we don't want to protect access to the polls. And that's really where the sad case here. Can Joe Biden move any Republicans? No, I don't think so. Is Manchin and Sinema, are they going to do anything on this? No. And that, that's also one of these things where, I think they're going to come back around for re-election in a couple of years. I'm certainly encouraging everyone to sit on their hands and not support them as we go forward on this, because this is an important American question. How can we get people to have access to the polls and have their voice heard?
The problem is, Dominique, when you say, surely Joe Biden has something on them, the problem with that is Joe Biden probably has something on them like, oh, you took 2 condiments from Popeyes and you didn't pay for 1. Whereas Trump's a stronghold on these Republican leaders are much more of a detriment.
I think it's because Biden has these delusions about bipartisanship. I think he's got a little bit more than condiments. I really do, after as long as he was in the Senate. But I just want to repeat this because I know Dr. Olek is about to say a bunch of stuff I don't agree with. Here's the truth. The Republican Party is a party that does not want Black people to vote.
Well, Dr. OJ, you are a Republican. Are you voting?
I am a Republican. I am voting. And Tammi Mac, you said that Dominique provided all the things that were feelings of yours.
Yeah.
Well, here are some facts that I think can go along with that.
Okay, you're trying to say she's gave me feelings.
It's the old mansplain. Here's the facts. She's got the feelings because women are all about feelings and hysteria.
Not a mansplain. Women can say the same things I'm about to say, and women have said what I'm about to say, and which is this. The president went down to Georgia and tried to say that Black voters' rights are under attack. Georgia has stronger absentee voting opportunities than Delaware, where this very president was in the Senate for some 40 years. It has better opportunities for voting than Colorado, which is where Major League Baseball took their All-Star game after they left Georgia. This particular speech, which was supposed to be this grand achievement of Joe Biden, was not attended by civil rights leaders because they said too little, too late, was not attended by Stacey Abrams, the queen of voter enfranchisement herself, because she had, quote, a scheduling conflict. This was not a speech that was necessary to give. Georgia, in particular, with their new voting rights law, enshrined a lot of the new voting procedures that led to the Democrat majority in the Senate. Let me repeat that. The bill in Georgia that people were so up in arms about enshrined in law a lot of the emergency COVID voting policy that brought 2 Democrat senators from Georgia. Black voters' voting rights are not under attack, not under assault, as demonstrated by the fact that Black voters voted in record numbers in 2018 and 2020 when Democrats won, and a lot of those laws have been enshrined because in 2020 they came during COVID emergency. What the Democrats are trying to do is create this smokescreen illusion to try to get people interested in voting in 2020. And this is the last thing I'll say on this. I think it's important for every viewer to understand. The Democrats will simultaneously tell you that January 6th, which was the federal government's involvement in voting, was wrong. They will also say, now we need that same federal government to be entirely in charge of the voting process. Let me ask you this. If the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed prior to 2020, and you had the same makeup of government that you had then, do you think that you would have had an election that was overturned? I think these are reasonable questions to ask. The fact that we have voting laws by state, that we have voting laws by municipality in a process that is incredibly divided, that allows local governments and state governments to make up their own policy, is the hallmark of our democratic republic. And if you change it the way that the Democrats are trying to do, you will eviscerate the opportunity for people to vote who don't have the opportunity in the past. Thankfully, we do have it now in this country.
Dominique, I know you want to
real quick.
I know. I'm just so glad Ed is here. Let's hear.
Yeah, let me just first start out. Black people are excellent, and I want everyone to remember the elections in Georgia and remember the lines that Black people had to stand in order to vote. It wasn't 1 hour lines. These were like 9-hour lines that people stood in the rain and the heat to vote, and that doesn't make any sense. There's nowhere in this country where you wait 8 hours in line, falling out over water to vote. It should be simple. And the reason why they had to is that you had a Republican Secretary of State who then became the governor that had closed polling locations in areas where Black people live and shut down voter registration blocks in areas where Black people live. This is how the Republican Party starts to restrict your access to the poll. So it wasn't because the senators got elected, the Democratic senators got elected. That was despite all the shenanigans that the Republicans had played. And that you can't look back at it and say, oh, because they got elected, there's no problem. No, there's clearly problems in Georgia. Georgia is one of the southern states. The whole reason why there was Voting Rights Act is because those ex-Confederate states worked extra hard to keep African Americans from getting to the poll. And this country can't ever forget it.
Dr. Oleka, there is something to be said that America has to have a Voting Rights Act, isn't there?
Yes, and America does have a Voting Rights Act. And again, each state is able to make up their voting laws. This is something that people should want. Because again, as you look at states,
no, you can't get away with that, Dr. Oleka. The reason we have a Voting Rights Act is because southern states were doing poll taxes, are doing poll taxes. We're doing everything in their local state jurisdiction to keep Black people from voting. The Republican Party is a party that doesn't want Black people to vote. That's why we had to bring in the feds in the first place.
Dominique,
that is the whole
that's
point.
factually
And not only that,
untrue.
I like the way you conveniently leave out these election officials, which are being replaced with Trump loyalists who will now have the power to overturn our free and fair elections, no matter how many people Hussein Fott and Stacey Abrams and Latasha Brown and others are able to register. If election officials can do the bidding of the 45th president and overturn free and fair elections, that's a problem too in Georgia. And I love the way you skip right over that.
The last two things that I'll say, that period of time that you're talking about, Dominique, because you said the Republican Party, everyone should know that it was the Democrats. Again, all you should know is that
when they used to be the racists, and now that's Dominique. So
Stacey Abrams was not at Biden's speech. That's all you should know.
We'll be right back on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac. I'm Tammi Mac. Hello there. So before we left, we were talking about Stacey Abrams not attending Joe Biden's speech. What's the insinuation or the implication behind that, Dr. Oleka?
Well, I mean, look, you are a candidate for governor in Georgia as a Democrat. The sitting president of the United States, who is a Democrat, comes to speak about voting rights, which is your signature issue, and you cite a scheduling conflict. To me, it suggests that Stacey Abrams thought that the Biden approach to this particular issue was wrong for Georgia, and it's the wrong approach to get anything done on this topic.
But they were very explicit. I mean, they were explicit about why they didn't go to the speech. It's because we don't need more speeches. We need legislation. And Stacey Abrams thanked the president for being there, but everybody, she wasn't the only one that didn't show up. We want legislation.
Yeah.
And I would co-sign on that and just say, look, voting rights is about as important an issue that you can get to African Americans. And, for the Biden administration, remember at the outset of their administration, there was a question of whether you pursue voting rights first or whether you go with the Build Back Better Act. This president chose to go with Build Back Better Act. He didn't get that done, and now he's coming to voting rights. What he's signaled and what African Americans feel is that voting rights was a secondary goal of the administration. And so I can understand why Stacey didn't participate.
That's exactly how Black people felt. I know, because I'm Black people. Dr. Oleka, you said earlier that, no American cares about January 6th and the insurrection or whatever. I'm going to say something to that. I don't too much care about the infrastructure and all that infrastructure he was talking about and working on. I'd rather my Voting Rights Act be passed. And I definitely thought that should have been number one on the docket. And particularly when he goes on a radio show and says, you ain't Black if you don't vote for me. Now, that directly said to all Black people that I am for you. So if you're for me, that means I need you to make me your priority. And so he's upset a lot of the Black community by not getting on those voting right acts expeditiously. Now, don't get me wrong. I care about infrastructure, just it's not the priority. That should have been first. Am I wrong for saying that, y'all?
You're right on. And in the end game, you can't even protect the infrastructure if we don't have diverse representation. This country has already shown that when there's big buckets of money that are flowing down, you have to have people steering it to all communities.
Yeah.
And that's why you need
What I
voting
want to
rights.
add to this, because you brought up, I think, a very important point, Tammi Mac, about what Joe Biden said in order to get elected and how he's conducted himself as president. I think when we're done with the Biden presidency, which I think will be in about three years, it'll be a tale of over expectations and lying to his constituents that put him in office. Because you're exactly right. He went on TV and said, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black, and then immediately did not focus on issues that were important to his black base.
Well, I ain't saying the man lying. I'm just saying he didn't get around to it fast enough.
And he won't. He won't get it done. It'll be on him.
Well, on Thursday, the Supreme Court blocked President Biden's vaccine and testing requirement aimed at large businesses, but it allowed for a vaccine mandate for certain healthcare workers. How will this move impact the country, Ed?
It's a decision. I mean, it in some ways it limits the power of the presidency, and you know, let's just pull back. When COVID hit, there were a lot of unknown variables about how this pandemic was spreading. We were seeing large numbers of people dying, and there was not yet access to a vaccine. And so the administration took action, to limit the spread of this pandemic. And what you've seen now is that the conservative court is weighing in and saying that the federal government overstepped its bounds. This will have some play down the line. In this particular case, the court is signaling is that for employees in companies that have over 100 people, your safety is not paramount. And that's, as a working class American, that's how you should interpret this. I would encourage everyone, take a look at the dissent. Anytime there's a Supreme Court decision, I take a look at what Sonia Sotomayor writes. The dissent that's written by her, signed by Kagan and the other, is a good dissent and frames this argument well.
Yeah, Dr. Oleka.
Well, naturally, I have a different opinion than Ed. I mean, if you watched these hearings, some of these justices didn't even know what was going on with COVID policy and what was happening in hospitals. I mean, you had Justice Sotomayor said that there were some thousands of kids or something like that on ventilators. That's certainly not true. And when Ed talks about this as a slap in the face or so-called to working class Americans, I just have a different perspective based on what I've seen here in Kentucky. A lot of folks who are working class want to keep going to work, and they're concerned about the vaccine or they're concerned about testing. A lot of these companies also in different states would have to pay for that testing, and that's something that they can't afford because tests are costly for businesses. So this is a concern, I think, from a myriad of different perspectives. And with regard to the presidency having so much power, I think it's a good thing that the courts said that OSHA doesn't have the particular capacity based on an early 20th century law that says that they can do all these things. It was upheld for Medicaid and Medicare and where you get significant resources with regard to federal health benefits, but it wasn't for companies that are in the private sector that have over 100 employees. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, I want to divert to the Book of Sean, which is the show here on Fox Soul as well. Dr. Sean on the Book of Sean said that 4 million people walked away from their jobs after the pandemic. And it's been a really big deal that these corporations and companies don't pay enough in the first place. So I don't know that there are a lot of people that are ready to go back to work more than there are a lot of people that want their corporations to do the right thing for them. Dominique, sorry to deter there, but I just had to mention it.
No, so many things. And the people walking away from jobs, what we find when we look at the data is that they're low wage jobs and essential jobs where people felt they were at risk. I don't know why the Supreme Court hates us. I don't know why they would say that OSHA, which is the agency in charge of keeping workers safe, doesn't have the right to at least impose COVID tests. Those are actually paid for by insurance companies per the Biden administration. So that's a weak argument, even if they weren't. My safety is worth the price of a COVID test. Vaccines, I know controversial, but how is it that you're telling me you have the right to force me to have a baby, but not a vaccine? And I think this is a real problem because it's already starting to make the Republican lawmakers say they don't have to get vaccinated to come on Capitol Hill, and the ripple effects will be significant, will put a lot of people at risk that don't need to be at risk. I think it's ironic that they allowed this to go forward for some healthcare workers, citing do no harm, which is what the vow that doctors take, because that's not a legal principle. That's just something that's the, Hippocratic oath. It has nothing to do with legal precedent. I think it's because they're elderly and they don't want to be in the hospital and have some doctor who hasn't been vaccinated and they get COVID. I mean, I couldn't figure out any other reason why you would make such a ridiculous ruling.
Ed?
I think we've learned a lot about COVID and sort of the response to it. I mean, when I look at it at the very outset, it was a very sound move by the administration. Look, we didn't know how this was playing out. I think what we've learned is that, if you do get vaccinated, it's less deadly to you. There's still the group that aren't getting vaccinated, and we have to figure out what to do with them. And this is really what this all comes down to from a policy prescription for this country. If you end up in the hospital and you're not vaccinated, who's paying for that? I mean, if you're on insurance and we have to pay more for you because you didn't get vaccinated. And I think that the issue of what's going to happen here is going to get dealt with there when we start to see that people who aren't vaccinated have to fund their own recovery efforts. Then all of this will start to make sense.
I think that is an absolutely ridiculous perspective from the standpoint of healthcare and taking care of people's lives. Let's just take a step back to repeat what we just heard. Basically, if you aren't vaccinated, which many people in the Black community are not, when Senator Kamala Harris said that she wouldn't get a vaccine by the Trump administration, what effectively that we're saying is that if you aren't vaccinated, then you don't have the right to health care, which last I checked, the left believed that health care was a right. And so now we're saying that if you don't get a vaccine, you shouldn't be taken care of.
And you cannot avoid sound
What about
bites.
people who are obese? What about people who have type 2 diabetes? What about people who get in bad accidents that they did on themselves? All of a sudden, you start having these other conversations about healthcare. It is remarkable to me how the idea of getting a vaccine, and somehow the federal government doesn't force you to do it, that now all of these costs and all these responsibilities have to be put on you. I think there's a large bit of inconsistency there, if not hypocrisy.
Insanely, I somewhat agree with Dr. Oleka.
I hope that you think about it.
Insanely, I somewhat agree with Dr. Oleka in the fact that I'm still not for forcing people to get vaccinated. But that's why I don't understand. Why would you not allow Cal OSHA to implement a mandatory testing? Because if you don't want to get vaccinated, you must be tested. You must be masked up. You must keep yourself safe, and you must protect your family and your community. And you know what?
So we must go to commercial break right now. We'll be right back on The Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac. Please welcome my co-host, the co-founder of the Anti-Racism Kentucky Coalition, Dr. O.J. Oleka, activist and radio personality Dominique DePrima, and political analyst Ed Sanders. This is The Business of Being Black, and I am Tammi Mac. Hello, everybody. So earlier this week, California Governor Gavin Newsom proposed universal health care coverage for low-income Californians, regardless of age or immigration status. If the proposal is supported, LA will be the first state in the country to achieve universal access to health coverage. Could this result in Californians and business owners paying more taxes? I'm just going to say this right up because listen, I'm all for that. What really, really gets my goat and what pisses me off is that it seems like everybody always puts Black people on the back burner. California hasn't even passed an affirmative action law yet. And Joe Biden chose to do the infrastructure before the Voting Rights Act. When will we get put number one on the docket as Black people is all I ask you. I'm not saying we shouldn't do the other stuff, but I am saying that America owes a heavy debt to the Black community. When will we see our payday? And I ain't talking about reparations. I'm just talking about putting us first at the least. Ed?
Listen, you raise what are sort of those bread and butter issues that we talk about as a people. You know, when viewers turn into The Business of Being Black, we're looking at how these issues impact African Americans. You know, with regards to universal health care, we just had a segment where we were talking about, you know, how you deal with COVID. And, you know, what we realize in this country is that there are a number of people that are not covered under healthcare. And when that happens, there are the gaps in healthcare create what are, you know, more or less pockets of people that don't get right service, they are more susceptible to disease and death. And that's something that we should be working towards. Universal healthcare is really about making sure that, as a promise as an American citizen, that you have access to keep your body safe. Now, how you pay for it, that'll be the question, right? And that's a political debate, and that will rage for whether it becomes taxes or streamlining. I tend to look at healthcare as you could pay me now, you could pay me later. If you do the preventative stuff, it's less costly down the line. And so, all of that will factor into the decision that California has to make.
Dominique.
Well, California is the first state in the country to actually have a reparations task force, and the governor signed it proudly.
This is true. This is absolutely
us
true.
First, and I'm loving that. I also think that when we talk about universal health care, we have to remember that disproportionately Black people are uncovered, uninsured. Why? Because of the wealth gap and so many other reasons. And we have, in many cases, disproportionate health needs because of racism, white supremacy, our own, habits, and so on and so on. So universal health care would disproportionately help Black people and Latino people because we're the ones that need it. And if you look at what's happening with economic data, healthcare bills are the main reason that families are bankrupt. The number one reason is medical bills that they cannot pay. Reasons for bad credit because folks can't pay those bills. And if you look at the impact of the pandemic on Black and brown communities, where we are dying at greater rates, having that healthcare. And I think this is where, for those who are against extending this courtesy to the undocumented, need to really think about whether you want an untreated COVID patient running around with you and have the compassion of saying, if there was ever a time when everyone deserved healthcare, it's now. And also we'll save a lot of money because healthcare in the United States costs more than anywhere else in the world because the insurance companies are running things.
They are definitely running it. And shouts out to Friday Jones, who heads up that reparations committee in California. But I will say this, I listen about that. Call me when the check is, when the checks go out, because I don't particularly feel like we even need a committee for that. I think it's just a way to prolong the situation. Everybody know Black folk need our old reparations.
Everybody Black knows.
No. Every American knows. They just don't want to say it, including Dr. O.J. Oleka.
Well, the initial question you asked about was whether or not this will cost Californians more in taxes. Yes, it will. Now, look, this may surprise some viewers, but if California wants to do this, I have no problem with California doing it. One of the reasons why I am a Republican is because I believe in this concept of federalism. Basically, this idea that states can kind of figure some things out. The federal government has a specific place. If California wants to provide universal health care for all of its citizens and all of its illegal immigrants or undocumented immigrants, however you would like to phrase it, they certainly have the ability to do so. But I will just say this. Rewarded behavior is repeated behavior. And if you don't think that allowing people who are in the country illegally health care will lead to more people coming to the country illegally, specifically California, I think you need to reconsider the bill. That's definitely what's going to happen. If you are sick and you are in a country that does not have good health care, you do not have health care there, and you hear that California is going to give you and your family free health care if you just show up, you're probably going to show up. That's something to consider.
A country like Kentucky.
Yeah, that's let's throw that benefit. The benefit is that people are showing up for work, and so when you focus on that, you really need to focus back on who's employing people and bringing the surplus of people in, and not hiring people like African Americans that are here.
4 Black women who are veterans in law enforcement are suing the Baltimore Police Department for alleged discrimination and harassment. One of the women, Sergeant Danica Yampierre, said, "We all love our job as police officers. That's why we stayed. But it's not the people whom we are protecting outside in the city that we're scared of. We're scared of the people inside. That's the problem." And those officers, if those officers were treated unfairly and didn't get the respect they deserve, how can we expect to be treated fairly by the police?
Well, it's Baltimore, and I say that
What does
sort of
that
tongue in cheek,
mean?
but the Baltimore police,
You
no, the
said
Baltimore
that
Police
like, well,
Department.
well, it's Baltimore. Let's move on.
No, 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 not at
I'm
all.
sorry, I don't know. What does that mean for
Yeah,
Baltimore?
the story, if you look at it isolated, you sort of focus on the statements in the suit of the four police officers. The Baltimore Police Department, over a long period of time, is probably the most corrupt police department in this country. You can go back to the Freddie Gray case and watch the way they protected officers, the cohesion with the courts and the DAs on that. And then just a couple of years ago, it was the gun task force, where they had a series of undercover officers that were admitted to consistently lying and planting evidence, and in order to get primarily African Americans convicted. So when you start to look at this police culture in the Baltimore policing department, what these ladies experienced, I expect her to hear that, and so fundamentally, policing in Baltimore is just, it is a microcosm, but a big part of what we talk about, what's wrong with policing in this country.
I think one of the challenges that you have is that it is very difficult to prove discrimination in cases. That's just how I understand discrimination law. And this is hard. I mean, I support Black women. I support law enforcement. And the fact that these Black women who have committed their careers, their lives, quite frankly, to this profession, and they feel like it hasn't been given back to them fairly is a significant problem. I think there was a report that there was some settlement in this very police department maybe late last year on this very type of issue. So perhaps it will be easier for them to prove this discrimination in the event that it did occur, and they said it did, so I have no reason not to believe them. But it's tough because we need more Black police officers, we need more Black women in law enforcement, and whether or not it is discrimination, the headline alone prevents that, and that's a problem.
It reminds me, as so many of these cases within the police department do, of Christopher Dorner. Remember the police officer that went on the rampage in Los Angeles, and he left his manifesto saying how corrupt the police department was, and obviously they found him and they shot him and they killed him. So, I mean, is there truth to what he was speaking and what he was trying to say to the world about the police department, and how do we fix this? What will become of these women, Dominique?
Well, if you look at the FBI report that came out a few years ago, they talked about the infiltration of police departments across the country by white supremacists and alt-right, far-right wingers. We saw that manifest on January 6th, where you had some officers participating in that domestic terror attack. We need to look at how we root out white supremacy, racism, and sexism from police departments, from the military, from law enforcement on all levels across this country. If we have discrimination against Black women in every other workplace, why wouldn't we have it in law enforcement? When we look at the outcomes in law enforcement, the way they profile Black people, people of color, and the racism that exists between the police departments and the community, of course it's going to exist internally. So to me, this is all part of reimagining policing and the radical reimagining that's going to happen if we're going to have just law enforcement.
We'll be right back on Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac on Fox Soul. Welcome back to Business of Being Black with Tammi Mac. Okay. Andrea Jenkins is making history, y'all, as the first openly transgender city council president in the United States. She was appointed to lead the Minneapolis City Council. She first made history in 2017 as the first Black transgender woman to be elected to public office in the United States. Let's talk about the importance of LGBTQ plus representation in public offices. And I want to give a special shout out to MJ Rodriguez of one of my favorite television shows, Pose, who was the first transgender to win a Golden Globe. But these public offices, we definitely want to diversify. So let's talk about how important this is, Dominique.
Well, representation matters for sure. And I am happy for people in the trans community to get more representation, considering especially Black trans women are under attack. They're actually literally being murdered at a scary rate in this country. So I'm glad to see the representation. As always, we want to go beyond representation to great policies as well.
Ed?
I agree with Dominique there. And one of the pieces about it is, and one of the reasons why I'll follow the careers is that it's Minneapolis. And when we look at, the George Floyd piece and what happens with the reform on police in Minneapolis, she's going to have a heavy say in that. And I'm happy, to your point, Dominique, about the violence against transgender, particularly African-American transgender people, that conversation gets folded into how the Minneapolis Police Department gets reformed.
Yeah, Dr. Oleka.
Well, it's like I said before, with federalism, this is a great example of this. Each community has the opportunity to elect whomever they would like. As the trans community continues to be more vocal about particular policies that impact them, I think it is going to be incredibly beneficial to hear from policymakers who have that identity. Identity is not everything, obviously, when it comes to policy, but having real policymakers who have that experience talking about policy, I think, can only strengthen the debate on the issues going forward.
Yeah. Okay, let's move right along to some more Black news. Man, I'm surprised that this particular story has a debate about it at all. Writer and poet Maya Angelou is the first Black woman to appear on a United States quarter, or a United States coin, right? I don't know. The coin went into circulation on Monday, and it pays tribute to her 1970 biography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Although many people are celebrating the achievement, The View talk show host Whoopi Goldberg argued that Angelou deserves better than being on a quarter. Whoopi said not too long ago, we were expected to have Harriet Tubman gracing the $20 bill. Remember that? Remember? But now it looks like the price has been slashed. They're slashing prices like Walmart's on Black people on coins here. Slash to a quarter, because now we have Maya Angelou on a quarter. What are your thoughts on what Whoopi said? And does Maya Angelou, I mean, there's a lot to kind of unravel here, because it's the thing about, does Maya deserve to be on a quarter, or do we deserve Harriet Tubman on that 20 like was promised? So what's with all the, and I've even run across some people saying, listen, I could care less who's on the quarter, the dollar, or the 100. Give me legislation. So where do we stand here, Dr. Oleka?
Well, I'm with you. I don't think there really needs to be that great deal of controversy on this. I think, quite frankly, I think that Whoopi Goldberg just wanted to have something with controversy, so she made it up here. I mean, I agree. I think Harriet Tubman would be great on the $20 bill, but I think it's great to have Maya Angelou on the quarter, in particular because when kids start to become more familiarized with money, it's usually through coinage when they're in school. So you see the picture and the face of the person who's on it. So if you have a Black woman, an incredible artist and poet like Maya Angelou, who did a lot in her lifetime, and kids start to ask, well, who's that? What did she accomplish? And every kid, Black girls in particular, but every kid gets to see who she is and how great of an American she was. I think that's important. So I think this is a great thing.
Ed?
Wow, OJ, I'm applauding that. I couldn't agree with him more.
You're applauding that he wants Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, Ed?
That part too, Great points, OJ. No one listens to you on the other stuff, But I think this is right. I mean, I'll take it another step forward. I think everything he said is right. But when you start to look at the story and the controversy, there really isn't a controversy. This is a series that's coming out. The quarters are honoring several different women across different walks of life. It's a very diverse group, and what should be. What I look for is the reaction, and so what I think you're going to see is this far right reaction to Maya Angelou on the quarter, and it's going to kind of be like, teaching critical race theory. And this is going to be something used on the right to gin up the right. Like, we shouldn't have this Black woman on the quarter. To everyone else in the world, it's a great thing, as it should be.
Dominique.
Critical race money. That's funny. Honestly, I understand the folks that are upset, because it is true. They keep giving Black people things we don't ask for and not the things we do ask for. I'd love to have voting rights legislation. How about my reparations instead of that quarter? Let's not forget. How
about put that quarter in my pocket?
Right? Let's not forget why Harriet Tubman is not on the 20. Trump. And so I think we have to really understand why people are upset. On the other hand, yes, it's great that she's there. It's great that these women are being honored. I don't know. I think most young people today are using Venmo. I don't know if they're looking at quarters, but okay, to that point.
That was my thought, Dominique. I'm like, I don't even know if millennials are picking up quarters and pennies.
And don't devalue us. I mean, I think 20 is better than a quarter. I do hail the achievement, but I can see why we want the things we're asking for, not the things we're not asking for.
Okay. Well, I want the things that I'm asking for and the things that I'm not asking for. I don't mind a little surprise in my cereal.
So true.
So listen, Barbie is coming out with a new doll to commemorate Ida B. Wells. I mean, this doll is so gorgeous. I have got to have it. The doll comes under Barbie's Inspiring Women series, including influential women such as Katherine Johnson, poet Maya Angelou, singer Ella Fitzgerald, and civil rights activist Rosa Parks. These are some gorgeous dolls. I appreciate the maker for making us look like we look and not, making us look like other people. That's all I have to say about that. It's a good thing. It is a good, solid thing. And this show was a good, solid show today. So thank you so much, Dominique. Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Dr. Oleka. You stick around for Claudia Jordan, Al, and Funky on TGIF. Until next time, that's the business of being Black with Tammi Mac on Fox Soul.